Hello and welcome to our sustainability interview series where we discuss circular economy, landfill, legislation and practical tips you can apply to your business to become more sustainable. In this episode, we're speaking to Kayleigh Lee-Simion, a circular economy champion and the founder of Circular Digest. We discuss global frameworks, how the conversation around plastic has changed over the years, how circular economy principles can address climate change challenges, tips and advice for SMEs wanting to become more environmentally friendly, and how the waste supply chain can better support small businesses.
I'm Kayleigh. I am a circular economy champion. So I started Circular Digest last October, so it's been running for about a year. We have about over 200 subscribers in all sectors. And what I really tried to make Circular Digest is a system not only for individuals to learn about the circular economy, but also to really action it. So every month we deliver curated insights, expert deep dives, and actionable recommendations for professionals working across innovation, strategy, policy, finance. And alongside that, I'm also the lead for plastics and circular economy at CDP. So my background has been quite varied. I've worked for NGOs, I've worked for sustainability consultancies. I've previously worked at a consultancy called Eunomia Research and Consulting, where I worked in a lot of circular economy policy. So we worked on the packaging waste regulation. We worked on Singapore's deposit return scheme. We influenced the EU's sustainable strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. And then it all led me to here. So I joined CDP in 2023, and at that time we had about 3,000 companies disclosing to our plastics questionnaire framework for the first time. We've seen an over 90% growth of that from 2023 to 2024. So definitely there's a demand there. I think really what businesses are starting to understand is not addressing your plastics impact and your wider material and circularity impact really is not just a financial risk, but it's also a reputational risk. It can be a social risk. It can be litigation risk. We see charities like Client Earth suing companies for not addressing their plastic pollution. That could lead to very bad effects in certain communities, human health effects. We have charities listing companies as the biggest waste makers in the world. No one wants to be on that biggest waste maker list. So I think we're definitely seeing companies realize that these different risks are all interconnected and can affect your finances. I think that's very clear to see over the past couple of years. Another thing I think that companies are becoming more aware of as well is to really address plastics and to create a circular system and transition to a circular economy. You can't just address the downstream. You can't just address plastic waste. You can't just do beach cleanups or make sure you are trying to send as much waste as possible to recycling. You do need to take a whole value chain approach. So you need to, first and foremost, try reduce the plastics you're using or producing. And then you need to try use it for as long as possible in a circular system, as long as possible at its highest value. So ideally for what it's made for, right? Not downcycled. And then if you've exhausted all those options, you send it to recycling. So you really don't want to be recycling it as a first option. You want to be trying to tackle more upstream solutions first, and then recycling is the last resort. And I think we're definitely seeing that changing conversation. Yeah, so the Global Plastics Treaty is a multilateral agreement to try get all the countries and the UN to agree a framework to address plastic pollution, particularly in the marine environment. Think of it similar to COP, that we have the Paris Agreement for climate. They're trying to agree an agreement for plastics. So there's been 5 now INCs. Those are intergovernmental committee negotiations. The UN has a lot of abbreviations that may not quite get those right, but this is where all the delegations from different countries and a lot of civil society, NGOs as well, get together and try to agree the text. So we have not reached an agreement. In August was INC 5.2. And so actually it's been 6 actually. So this ended without an agreement. And there's a couple key sticking points that are really difficult to agree, especially when you have all producing nations not wanting to agree what more high ambition nations want to agree. For example, one of the key sticking points is plastic production. The high ambition countries want a cap on plastic production. Obviously, for all producing nations, that is a very significant proportion of their economy. So they don't want that and would prefer to focus on downstream measures such as increasing waste infrastructure, reducing the amount of plastic leakage into the environment. Another sticking point is chemicals of concern. Again, there is a lack of agreement and consensus over what chemicals and what types of plastics are identified as problematic. So there is currently in the plastic space and circular economy space, there's no widely agreed list of what chemicals are of concern and what types of plastics are unnecessary and problematic and avoidable and should be not used. Of course, we do have some legislation. The EU has REACH, for example, that does list some chemicals, but it's hardly, I would say, widely agreed globally. So these are some of the kind of issues that the plastics negotiations are currently facing. When the terms of the agreement were agreed back in, I think, 2022, it said that to agree the text, it needs to be by consensus, not majority. So this means every single country in the UN, I think that's 160 plus, need to agree. So therefore, the negotiations are kind of stalling at the moment because high ambition countries don't want to reduce their demands. All producing nations are never going to agree to that. So it's kind of a dead end at the moment, which is a shame, but this is kind of multilateralism. This happens. We've seen it with the Paris Agreement. It was very difficult to agree that the high treaty, the Treaty for High Seas or something like that, took about 10 years to agree. It does happen, but yeah, it's a difficult one. I think what people often don't realize about the circular economy is that it's really a lever that can be utilized across all the different climate and nature goals you're trying to achieve. Production creates the most impact. Say in the plastic value chain, the majority of impacts actually come at production, at extraction and production, which is way, way upstream. So by the time you produce all these virgin plastics and you get to recycling it, the emissions are already embedded in the plastic. So to really significantly reduce the carbon emissions of materials, plastic, other materials as well, you want to reduce production in the first place. And that's what the circular economy, that's the core value. One of the core values of the circular economy is to reduce production, reduce what we're using, and to keep circulating materials in this system at its highest value for as long as possible. And another core principle of the circular economy is to regenerate nature as well. So by leaving oil in the ground, by not mining minerals, because we have developed a circular system to continuously reuse and recycle, say, the lithium in our phone batteries. By doing that, we are reducing our impacts on nature as well. We're reducing biodiversity loss. We're reducing land use change. We are reducing water usage. So the circular economy really does have effects on lots of different types of environmental impacts. And we do need to take this holistic view to be able to be able to tackle all of these environmental impacts that we have. Just tackling one aspect isn't enough. We know that there's multiple environmental crises that really we need to address at the same time. And the circular economy, by reducing what we're using, by circulating materials at its highest value for as long as possible, by recycling, etc., we do that. Yeah, definitely. And I think SMEs is such an important sector. I guess you can call SMEs a sector because the majority of companies are actually SMEs. There are actually in the grand scheme of all the companies in the world, there's very few multinational corporations, right? So to really tackle these issues, to really tackle climate and nature challenges and transition to the circular economy, we need to be supporting SMEs to do that. So I think my first tip would be you don't need to try tackle everything all at once. That is far too intense for a small company. It's very intense for a large company too. So you definitely do need to prioritize. And when you think about material and resource usage, the way you can do that is, I like to call it a materiality assessment. So lots of materials. But what materials are you using? What materials have the biggest environmental impact? What materials do you use the most? Where can you actually make changes to that material? And by doing this kind of almost like this double materiality assessment for your materials, you can start prioritizing. Okay, what material has a large impact, we're using a lot of, and also we actually could change. If you're a small SME, going back to my lithium in batteries example, you can't really change that, right? But you could potentially change the packaging and you have power over that. So I think that's a really important exercise that I would encourage SMEs to definitely carry out. So prioritize the materials in your value chain that you really want to work on. A second recommendation I would have is, I think collaboration is key. To transition to a circular economy, it's a systemic change, right? That's what we call it. We call it a systems change. So you need to work with other members of your supply chain. You need to work with potentially local government. You need to work with other businesses around to be able to create these circular systems. And who knows, by doing this, you may find out that there are systems or initiatives already in place that you can then join. You don't need to set up everything from scratch. And I would say for SMEs, there tend to be a lot of local pilot initiatives going on. It's just a case of finding them or working together to make it happen. And so I would say that I think value chain collaboration is so important. And you can start small. You can start small with just a couple of different upstream suppliers, for example. But then that has the domino effect of affecting the wider supply chain, right? You don't need to collaborate with or create a new circular initiative with every single member in your supply chain, but I like to think of it as a domino effect. You collaborate with maybe one supplier and then they may collaborate with another supplier, and suddenly you have a reverse logistics system reusing materials across your value chain, and that's where the impact happens. Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with waste brokers. I think waste brokers are incredibly important, especially for SMEs. SMEs may not necessarily have their own waste system in place. They may be relying on the local infrastructure. They may not even generate that much waste as well. So sometimes it can really be difficult to figure out how is the best way to dispose this waste to increase the circularity of it. But that's really where the waste brokers come in, because they can aggregate the waste from multiple SMEs in an area, or even in a sector or something like that, to make sure it's being reused as much as possible, recycled as much as possible, and other disposal methods or recycling methods as high up as possible in the waste hierarchy. So I think waste brokers are really, really important member of the value chain, especially when it comes to SMEs who may not have the time and resources to direct their waste to a more circular disposal end-of-life management method. So definitely, I think waste brokers really can scale up circular management of waste, especially for SMEs. So I think this is, again, going back to that collaboration piece I was talking about, this is where the magic happens. Even if an SME or kind of a company is not working directly with a supply chain member to develop a circular initiative, there's no reason why we can't be sharing knowledge. For example, there's no reason why we can't be making sure that we're taking lessons from initiatives and pilots somewhere else in the sector and sharing it with other sectors, with other value chains, to increase that knowledge. And I think that's really important. I think there needs to be more accessible knowledge sharing, I would say. And often localized is good too, because when you think about our waste infrastructure in the UK, it is all local. It's on a borough by borough basis. It's not even regional, really. I'm based in London, so how many different waste management infrastructures do we have in London? So I would say that knowledge sharing from a localized and also an SME perspective is really where supply chain partners and industry networks can support to scale up and transition to the circular economy. So we were talking about SMEs. And I think that SMEs are such a hidden, like a missing part of the parcel. When we talk about the circular economy, we think about what are the L'Oreals and the Walmarts of the world doing in terms of their material usage and their waste. But I think SMEs are a really, really powerful sector to be able to transition to the circular economy. So I would say don't be afraid if you're an SME to start taking some action, whatever that may be, because a little bit is better than nothing. And I think once companies start mapping out what are they using and what can they do about it, it's not as scary as it seems. Whereas if you go from we don't know what we're doing with our waste to, okay, now let's become a circular business, that's a little bit more daunting. So I would say any action is good. And I would also say subscribe to Circular Digest.
To discover more about waste managed and the importance of circular economy, download our free ESG guide.